The coffee was still warm when Alyssa Redfeather disappeared. It was a quiet night on the Wind River Reservation, late March 1990. The air was dry, and the highway stretched empty under the pale glow of a half-moon. Alyssa had finished her night shift at the Red Hill gas stop, a small roadside station that closed just after midnight. Security footage showed her locking the glass door, checking the till and walking out with her jacket zipped to the top. She carried her purse and a thermos of coffee. At 12:27 a.m., a state trooper passed her car driving east along Route 26. Everything looked ordinary then, a small blue sedan moving steadily toward Riverton. 30 minutes later, that same trooper found the same car idling by the roadside, headlights still on. The driver's door was closed. The keys were in the ignition. Inside, the radio played faintly through static. The thermos sat in the holder, steam still rising from the lid. There was no sign of Alyssa. When the trooper looked around with his flashlight, he found her purse on the passenger seat, untouched. Her wallet, ID, and cash were inside. The driver's seat was pushed slightly forward, as if she had just stepped out. A faint set of footprints led from the car toward the gravel shoulder, but stopped abruptly a few feet away. The ground around them was undisturbed. Backup arrived at 1:15 a.m. The officers spread out, scanning the ditches and brush with handheld lights. The temperature had dropped close to freezing. A search dog was brought in, but lost the scent near the edge of the asphalt. No tire marks, no signs of a struggle, no drag marks. It was as if she had stepped off the road and vanished into the dark. The car was towed to the county impound lot by dawn. Investigators dusted for prints but found only hers. The glove compartment held a few pay stubs, an old cassette tape and a folded grocery list. Nothing pointed to a reason she would stop there. Nothing explained how a young woman could disappear from a well-lit stretch of road without a sound. At 8 a.m., Deputy Tom Harlan from the Fremont County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene. He walked the perimeter again, kneeling near the footprints. He noticed something faint beneath the gravel, a tire impression, possibly from a larger vehicle running parallel to the road. It was wide, heavy, and deep enough to belong to a pickup or freight truck. But no one had reported a breakdown or accident in the area that night. When daylight spread across the plain, officers expanded the search radius. They found no clothing, no personal items, no signs of struggle. Her car had half a tank of fuel. There were no skid marks to suggest a forced stop. By noon, word spread through the reservation that Alyssa Redfeather was missing. Locals began to gather along the roadside, offering to help. Some recognized the car immediately. They had seen her driving that same route every night for months after work. For them, the scene felt impossible. Too ordinary, too familiar. Detectives questioned truckers who had passed through the area that night. A driver recalled seeing a blue sedan on the shoulder with its lights flashing, but he assumed it was mechanical trouble. Another thought he saw someone standing near the car, but he could not describe who. The accounts were inconsistent, blurred by distance and darkness. That evening, investigators brought in a tracking team. They searched both sides of the road until nightfall. The only discovery was a single glove, lying several yards from where the footprints ended. It matched the kind Alyssa was known to wear at work. Forensics collected it carefully, sealing it in a paper bag. By the second night, the search widened to include nearby woods, riverbanks, and empty cabins. Dozens of volunteers joined, carrying flashlights and walking in lines through the open fields. Helicopters scanned the area with thermal imaging, but no heat signatures appeared. Nothing connected the dots between her car and her disappearance. Detective Mark Hensley, the lead investigator, stood by the idling patrol vehicle, reviewing the notes. The timeline made little sense. She had left work at midnight. She should have reached home by 12:40. Instead, at 12:30, her car was running empty on the side of the road. There were no phone calls, no breakdowns, no witnesses. As night fell again, officers began to realize what they were dealing with. This was not a case of a runaway, a breakdown, or a spontaneous disappearance. Someone had stopped that car. Someone had taken Alyssa Redfeather in less than the time it took her coffee to cool. When the last searchlight turned off and the crowd dispersed, the highway returned to silence. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint hum of passing trucks. The scene looked normal again, just another Wyoming road. But investigators would remember that night for decades because nothing about it felt ordinary, and as they reviewed the empty prints and the still warm coffee, they knew this case would not be simple. Before the night she vanished, Alyssa Redfeather lived a quiet and steady life on the Wind River Reservation. She was 23 years old, the eldest of 3 siblings and known for her calm strength. Her days followed a pattern that rarely changed. Early mornings at the tribal school where she worked part-time as a teaching assistant, evenings at the Red Hill gas stop, and late nights driving home along the same stretch of Route 26, Alyssa had grown up in a small house on the edge of the reservation, surrounded by sagebrush and open fields. After her father's death in a ranch accident when she was 16, she became the main support for her mother and younger brothers. People described her as responsible, reserved, and kind. She never missed work, never complained, and was careful with every dollar she earned. Those who knew her said she carried herself with quiet determination. She had recently saved enough to enroll in community college the following fall. She wanted to study education, hoping one day to return as a full-time teacher for the tribal school. That dream became her routine. Long hours, little rest, and constant planning. Her friends remembered that week as ordinary. She had spent Sunday evening grading student papers and left early for her shift Monday night. She called home around 11 p.m. to tell her mother she would be back soon and to check if her brothers were asleep. Her voice had sounded normal, steady, just tired from work. It was the last time anyone heard from her. Investigators pieced together small fragments of her final days. A co-worker recalled a man with a pickup truck who stopped by the station late at night asking for directions. Alyssa had helped him find his way on a map taped to the counter. Another customer remembered her smiling while counting change, polite but distant. She was the kind of person people noticed for her calmness, not her words. The next morning, her mother, Nora, woke up to find her daughter's bed empty. When she called the gas station, they told her Alyssa had left on time. By noon, officers were at the door asking for a recent photograph. Nora handed them a framed picture of Alyssa from her high school graduation, long dark hair, serious expression, wearing a white shirt under the gown. It became the image that filled missing posters across the reservation. The investigation into her life revealed no secrets, no sudden changes, and no reason for her to disappear willingly. She had no history of running away, no romantic disputes, no involvement in trouble. Every person interviewed described her as careful, cautious, and protective of her family. Detective Hensley later said that this was what made the case so difficult. There was nothing about Alyssa's life that suggested risk. She was stable, trusted, and known by almost everyone in her small community. But sometimes, as the detective noted in his report, ordinary lives end in extraordinary silence, and in Alyssa's case, that silence had begun the moment her car stopped on Route 26, a silence that would soon deepen as investigators uncovered the last traces of her final night. 11:58 p.m. on March 26, 1990, Alyssa Redfeather locked the door of the Red Hill gas stop for the last time. The security camera above the counter captured her moving through her closing routine, counting the register, turning off one fluorescent light, and placing her keys in her jacket pocket. Outside, the night was still, the air crisp and the sky clear enough to see the distant ridgelines. She walked to her small blue sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. The lot was empty, except for a pickup truck idling near the far pump. Its driver sat with the headlights off, engine running. Alyssa barely glanced in that direction. She started her car, adjusted the mirror, and drove off toward the eastbound lane of Route 26. Minutes later, the same truck pulled out from the lot and followed her taillights into the dark. The drive from the station to her home should have taken 15 minutes. She knew the road well, a straight, open stretch bordered by thin woods and frozen fields. According to the clock on her car radio, she made it about halfway before something caused her to stop. The trooper who later discovered the car estimated it had been running for less than 20 minutes when he found it. When investigators reviewed the gas station tape, they paused at the moment the truck appeared. It was a dark blue pickup, older model, missing a front hubcap. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low. The license plate was partially obscured by dirt. The video quality made it impossible to read. Still, the timestamp aligned with Alyssa's departure. That detail became the first clue, and the last clear image of the Person who may have taken her detective. Mark Hensley arrived at the impound lot the following morning. He walked around the car slowly, recording each angle. There was no sign of forced entry. The driver's seat was forward, as if she had just stepped out. The coffee in the holder was half full and still faintly warm. Her purse sat neatly on the seat beside her. Zipper closed. Inside the glove compartment, he found 2 pay stubs, an unopened pack of gum, and a folded receipt from the gas station, time-stamped 12:04 a.m. That meant she had bought one final item before leaving, a coffee refill. Out on Route 26, investigators combed the roadside in daylight. The first noticeable mark was a set of deep tire impressions running parallel to the highway, veering slightly toward the gravel shoulder. They did not match Alyssa's car. The spacing suggested a larger vehicle, likely a truck. A few feet away, they found a small tear in the grass. Something had pressed down hard enough to flatten it, but not long enough to leave lasting damage. Next to it lay a single jacket button, dark brown, coated with frost. The search expanded along both directions of the road. Volunteers from the reservation joined deputies, forming a long line that stretched nearly a mile. They found nothing beyond the button and the faint tire marks. The ground was too frozen for footprints, except for the short trail near her car that ended abruptly. Forensic teams gathered soil samples and photographed every inch of the scene. The button was sent for testing. Results came back inconclusive. No prints, no blood, no usable trace evidence. It belonged to a standard women's jacket, likely Alyssa's. By the end of the day, the working theory was that she had pulled over, possibly for mechanical trouble or after being signaled by another vehicle. There were no mechanical issues with the car, which led to the second theory. She stopped because she trusted the person who approached her. That night, detectives revisited the gas station to question Alyssa's co-workers. One mentioned seeing the same pickup truck earlier that week, parked across the road without anyone inside. Another recalled Alyssa saying a man had come in asking for directions to the industrial park outside Riverton. The investigators traced the road leading there, but found nothing suspicious. Still, the presence of that truck remained the most solid lead. At 10 p.m., a local hunter driving home noticed police activity and stopped to ask questions. He mentioned something he had seen earlier that morning, a scrap of fabric caught on a branch about 3 miles east of where the car had been found. Deputies followed his directions the next morning. In a shallow ditch near the tree line, they located the item. A scarf with faded red and white stripes partially stained dark. The scarf was carefully bagged and sent to the state lab. Early tests showed traces of human blood. Though too little to determine type or origin, this discovery changed the tone of the investigation. Until that moment, there had been quiet hope that Alyssa might have walked away or gotten lost. The scarf removed that hope. It placed violence into the timeline. The area where it was found showed no struggle, only wind-blown grass and a few scattered stones. Detectives concluded she may have been taken further into the woods or moved elsewhere. By the third day, every available officer had been assigned to the case. Patrols checked truck stops, motels, and back roads across Fremont County. Flyers went up in Riverton, Lander, and nearby towns. A $5,000 reward was announced for any information leading to Alyssa's whereabouts. Still, the phone lines stayed quiet. No ransom calls, no sightings, no fresh evidence. As the sun set on the fourth night, Detective Hensley stood by the highway again, looking out over the dark plain. The wind pressed against the tall grass, making it ripple like water under the headlights. Somewhere out there, he thought, was the missing link between that truck and Alyssa Redfeather's disappearance. He could feel it. Something had happened on that road that no one saw, and it had taken less than a minute to erase her completely. The next morning, the first of many grim discoveries began to surface. Detective Mark Hensley began the investigation before sunrise on March 27, 1990. The cold air still carried the faint scent of gasoline from where Alyssa's car had been towed hours earlier. Forensic teams were already analyzing every item collected from the scene: the glove, the scarf, the soil samples, and the button from her jacket. Hensley knew the odds were already against them. The first 24 hours were critical, and they had passed without a single solid lead. His first step was to reconstruct her route. Alyssa left the Red Hill gas stop at exactly 12:06 a.m., She was expected home by 12:40. The distance between the 2 points was just under 15 miles. Somewhere along that short stretch she vanished. Hensley and his partner, Deputy Tom Harlan, drove the road repeatedly that morning, mapping every bend and every potential turnoff. They noted how visible her blue sedan would have been in the open stretch. Whoever stopped her had done so fast, too fast for coincidence. Detectives checked the gas station again, focusing on the man in the pickup truck. The night clerk described him as white, mid-30s, wearing a dark cap and denim jacket. He had asked for directions, stayed for less than a minute and left without buying anything. The store's security camera caught part of his face when he leaned toward the counter, but the footage was grainy. The logo on his jacket was blurred, unreadable. Hensley sent copies of the image to state police and nearby trucking companies, hoping someone would recognize the vehicle or the man. None did. There were hundreds of similar pickups registered in Wyoming, and none led to a match. By the second day, search teams expanded to nearby rivers, drainage ditches, and abandoned barns. Volunteers from the reservation joined county deputies, bringing horses and off-road vehicles to cover rough terrain. The search stretched across 20 square miles, but produced nothing new. Inside the sheriff's office, phones rang with tips. Some callers claimed to have seen the truck earlier that week parked along the highway. Others mentioned strange noises near the river at night. Each lead was logged and checked, but none connected directly to Alyssa's disappearance. As the investigation deepened, federal involvement became necessary. Because the case took place on tribal land and involved a native victim, jurisdiction was shared between the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, the Wind River Police, and the FBI. This overlap slowed communication and delayed procedures. Files had to be approved by multiple agencies, and interviews often overlapped. Still, Hensley refused to let the case slip. He coordinated interviews with Alyssa's co-workers, friends, and family. None of them reported conflicts or unusual behavior. She had no enemies, no relationships that raised suspicion, and no reason to leave voluntarily. Every personal belonging was still in her car: keys, wallet, and purse. On March 29th, a forensic team confirmed that the blood found on the scarf was human, but it was too degraded for typing. The sample was stored for future testing, though in 1990, DNA profiling was still in its early stages. The lead offered little progress. By early April, Hensley began checking vehicle records for every dark blue pickup in the county. The process was slow. Most belonged to farmers or delivery workers. One by one, they were ruled out. Then a possible match surfaced. A truck fitting the description had been reported stolen from a rest stop near Lander 2 days before Alyssa disappeared. The vehicle was found abandoned in a rural field just outside Casper. Its license plate had been removed. The interior was stripped, the seats torn. A mechanic from the local yard confirmed it was a 1981 Ford F-150. Same color and tire pattern as the tracks found near Route 26. Forensics dusted for prints and lifted 2 partial impressions, neither clear enough to identify. The stolen truck became the strongest link, but it also marked the first dead end. Whoever had taken it left no trace, no registration, no witnesses. The case file grew thicker, filled with reports that went nowhere. By the end of the first month, hope was thinning. Officers still patrolled the highway at night, flashing lights into fields waiting for something to appear. Flyers bearing Alyssa's photo covered store windows and telephone poles across Wyoming. Each week, fewer volunteers showed up for searches. Detective Hensley stood in his office one evening, staring at the map pinned to his wall. Red markers dotted every place they had searched. The highway cut through them like a scar. Somewhere along that line, he believed, was the answer. But every time they thought they had found a lead, it dissolved into silence. On the 15th day, the FBI's regional supervisor called the investigation inconclusive. The official file would remain open, but no new steps were planned. That night, Hensley wrote his final report for the week and underlined one sentence twice. The truck is the key. He did not know then how right he was, or how long it would take for that key to unlock the truth. 2 months had passed since Alyssa Crow vanished, and the case had all but stalled. The search teams had dwindled, the posters were fading in the rain, and the community had grown quiet. A silence that comes when people stop believing in answers. Detective Mark Hensley, though, hadn't stopped. He still drove the same 15-mile stretch every week, retracing the road between the gas station and the point where her car was found. Then, in late May 1990, a phone call changed everything. A rancher named Bill Conrad, who owned property near the river north of Highway 26, called the sheriff's office to report something unusual. The spring thaw had lowered the riverbank, revealing what looked like a torn piece of fabric caught between tree roots. Hensley arrived within the hour. The waterline had dropped enough to expose several patches of mud along the bank. There, half buried in silt, was a piece of blue cloth, the same shade as Alyssa's missing denim jacket. Forensic teams cordoned off the area, digging carefully through layers of mud and leaves. Within minutes, they uncovered more: a boot print preserved in the hardened riverbed, and a fragment of a metal zipper nearby. As they worked, the smell of the wet earth grew heavier. And then came the worst discovery: a lock of dark hair tangled in the roots just below the surface. The search was immediately expanded downstream. Within hours, human remains were found roughly 300 yards from the original spot, partially submerged near a bend in the river. The coroner confirmed what everyone already feared: the remains belonged to Alyssa Crow. Hensley stood by the water, hat in hand, as the body was lifted out. Even after weeks in the cold current, her form was recognizable by the small silver bracelet on her wrist, the one her mother had given her on her 17th birthday. The recovery brought both closure and heartbreak to the community, but for Hensley, it reignited the investigation. The autopsy revealed chilling details. Alyssa had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of her head and several fractures along her ribs. There were no signs of drowning. The cause of death was determined to be head injury, followed by exposure. Traces of oil residue were found on her clothing, suggesting she had been near a vehicle or machinery before death, perhaps the pickup truck. Within days, attention returned to the stolen Ford F-150. Forensics re-examined the partial fingerprints lifted from its door handle. This time, using enhanced imaging methods available through the FBI, they identified a probable match: a local mechanic named Earl Whitaker, who had prior arrests for theft and assault. Whitaker lived less than 20 miles from the site where the truck was found. When questioned, he denied any involvement and claimed he'd left town the week Alyssa disappeared. But inconsistencies in his timeline stood out. He couldn't explain why a burned glove matching the type found at Alyssa's car scene was discovered in his workshop's trash bin. Investigators obtained a warrant and searched his property. Inside a shed behind his house, they found several stolen vehicle parts. But one item in particular caught Hensley's eye: a brown wool scarf with faint, reddish stains. It matched the description of the one found near Alyssa's car. Forensic testing confirmed the blood on the scarf was the same type as Alyssa's. While DNA testing wasn't yet conclusive in 1990, it was enough to make Whitaker the prime suspect. Still, there wasn't enough for a conviction. No witnesses, no direct evidence linking him to Alyssa that night. Whitaker maintained his innocence and was released after 48 hours. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, Hensley revisited every lead Whitaker might have touched. Through interviews, he learned that Whitaker often repaired trucks for long-haul drivers passing through the area. One name appeared repeatedly in those conversations: Daniel Reeves, a drifter who sometimes stayed in Whitaker's trailer yard. Reeves had vanished shortly after Alyssa's disappearance. Hensley began digging. Reeves had a criminal record spanning 3 states, including kidnapping and battery. His last known address was a trailer lot near Lander, less than 5 miles from where Alyssa's car had been abandoned. When Hensley reviewed the pickup's stolen vehicle report, something clicked. The rest stop where the Ford was taken was only 2 miles from that trailer park. Reeves's description: medium build, brown hair, denim jacket, fit the gas station witness's memory of the man who'd asked Alyssa for directions. For the first time in weeks, the case had direction again. Hensley forwarded the information to the FBI and obtained an interstate alert for Reeves. His file included a note: "Consider armed and dangerous." That night, as Hensley drove home through the same stretch of highway where Alyssa had vanished, he passed the Red Hill gas stop. The neon sign flickered like it had that night. The road was empty except for the sound of wind over the plains. He slowed down and looked into the darkness beyond the ditch. The same darkness Alyssa must have faced. The first break had come, but deep down Hensley knew it wasn't over. Whoever took Alyssa had been careful, deliberate, and patient. And if Reeves was still alive, he might not be done running. The arrest warrant for Daniel Reeves was issued 3 weeks after Alyssa's remains were found. His name had circulated through every law enforcement channel, from Wyoming to Montana, but no one had seen him since April. Then, one evening, a truck driver reported a man matching Reeves's description working odd jobs at a remote oil field near Casper, roughly 180 miles east of Wind River. Detective Mark Hensley and a pair of federal agents drove out before dawn. The oil field sat in a flat stretch of land, surrounded by rusted storage tanks and scattered trailers. The foreman said Reeves had been living in a small camper behind the main office for about a month, mostly silent, always paying in cash. He went by the name Tom. When officers knocked on the camper door, no one answered. The blinds were drawn, but a faint light flickered from inside. Hensley ordered the team to hold position, then circled to the back. Through the window, he saw a man hunched over a table, rolling cigarettes beside a stack of old photographs. One was unmistakable, a photo of Alyssa smiling in her gas station uniform. The arrest was quiet but tense. Reeves didn't resist, only asked for a cigarette before being handcuffed. Inside the camper, investigators found Alyssa's missing bracelet, wrapped in cloth and hidden in a toolbox. That single piece of evidence turned a suspect into a killer. At the sheriff's office, Reeves sat motionless through the interrogation. He said little, speaking only to deny ever meeting Alyssa. But when shown the bracelet, he stared at it for several seconds before turning away. Hensley noted how his hands trembled slightly, the first visible crack in an otherwise flat expression. Forensic analysts processed the camper overnight. They lifted fingerprints matching Reeves on the bracelet's clasp and on one of the coffee cups found inside. More chillingly, soil samples taken from his boots matched sediment from the Wind River bank where Alyssa's body had been recovered. By morning, Hensley finally had enough to charge him, but Reeves wasn't finished talking. During the second interview, he claimed the bracelet had been given to him, insisting someone else had killed Alyssa. He refused to name who. Instead, he spoke about the road, about picking up strangers who did not belong. His words were fragmented, his tone eerily calm. Detectives dismissed much of it as manipulation, until they discovered a map folded in Reeves's glove compartment. It marked 3 red X's across rural Wyoming, each next to a handwritten note, Bridge Creek Fence Line. Hensley ordered immediate searches of all 3 sites. At the first location near Fremont County, investigators found only broken glass and tire tracks. But at the second site, a creek bed north of Lander, they uncovered something undeniable. A rusted earring matching the style of Alyssa's pair, and a woman's shoe half buried in gravel. The discovery raised a darker question. Had Alyssa been his only victim? The FBI expanded the case, reviewing reports of missing Native women across neighboring reservations from the late 1980s. Several matched Reeves's travel routes. Each case had similar details: abandoned vehicles, signs of a struggle near isolated roads, and victims last seen alone after night shifts. As the investigation grew, Reeves grew restless. In his cell he began pacing, muttering about voices by the river and the one who was watching. Hensley wasn't sure if it was guilt or performance, but it left him unsettled. Then came the twist that would redefine the entire case. 2 weeks before trial preparation began, the forensic team reanalyzed the fibers found on Alyssa's jacket. They discovered something unexpected: traces of fiberglass insulation, a material not present in Reeves's camper or the oil field. When compared to the sample taken from Earl Whitaker's workshop, the match was exact. Whitaker, the mechanic first questioned months earlier, was suddenly back in focus. It suggested Reeves hadn't acted alone. Hensley confronted Reeves with the findings. Reeves looked up, half smiling for the first time. "You are late," he said quietly. "He is gone." That night, Whitaker's property was found abandoned. His truck was missing, his workshop stripped bare. Tire marks led away from the yard toward Highway 26, the same direction where Alyssa had disappeared. Hensley stood in the doorway of the empty shed, looking at the dust settling over the floor. For months he had thought the monster was one man. Now it seemed the truth ran deeper. Buried in the quiet roads of Wyoming, Reeves sat in his cell waiting. Whitaker was somewhere out there moving again. And for Detective Mark Hensley, the real hunt had just begun. The search for Earl Whitaker became one of the largest manhunts in Fremont County history. Every highway, rest stop, and back road from Wind River to Riverton was checked. Yet every lead ended in silence. Whitaker's truck, a faded green Ford, was spotted twice in the first week, once near the state border and again outside a closed diner. Both sightings turned out to be wrong. Detective Mark Hensley refused to close the file. He believed Whitaker was still in Wyoming, hiding in plain sight. But without new evidence, every hour made the trail colder. For weeks, investigators sifted through the past, hoping to uncover a connection between Whitaker and Daniel Reeves. They had worked together briefly at a repair shop in Casper in 1988. Witnesses recalled them as quiet men who kept to themselves. They shared long drives to the oil fields and spent nights drinking behind the shop. But after 1989, Whitaker quit, sold his tools and vanished from most records. The link was thin, too thin to charge him with anything. Prosecutors warned Hensley that without physical evidence, Reeves could still claim Whitaker was the real killer. The detective knew that if the case unraveled, Alyssa Redfeather's murder might remain legally unresolved. Then came another break that led nowhere. A hunter reported finding a burned-out vehicle in the Bighorn foothills, matching Whitaker's model. For 2 days, search teams combed the woods, finding only ash, twisted metal, and a melted license plate that was unreadable. Forensics could not confirm if it was Whitaker's truck. Each false lead drained the investigation's momentum. Reporters began to question whether police had arrested the wrong man. Families of other missing Native women reached out, desperate for answers. The emotional weight of the case grew heavier, pressing on everyone involved. Hensley started spending nights in his office, studying the case files again and again. He pinned a map of Wyoming to the wall, marking every known movement of Reeves and Whitaker with red thread. The lines crossed near one area, the old quarry road 15 miles south of Riverton. That same road had appeared once before in Reeves's travel logs. It was isolated, rarely used, and lined with abandoned mining equipment. A search team was sent in, moving slowly through the overgrown trails. They found nothing that tied directly to Alyssa, but buried beneath a layer of loose gravel, they uncovered fragments of cloth and shoe leather, weathered almost beyond recognition. Forensics later confirmed the material predated Alyssa's disappearance by several years. Still, it was enough to suggest something, that Whitaker and Reeves had used the same territory long before 1990. As the days passed, the case began slipping again into uncertainty. Reeves stopped speaking altogether. He refused food, refused visitors, and spent hours staring at the wall of his cell. He offered no further information about Whitaker's location. Hensley filed daily reports, but even his tone began to change. What had started as a clear investigation now felt like chasing shadows through open country. Each discovery pointed backward, not forward. Each suspect's silence deepened the mystery. By the end of the month, the press had moved on. Funding for extended field searches was cut. Officially, Whitaker was listed as missing and presumed armed. Unofficially, Hensley knew the truth. He was still out there. The detective's final note that month was short. Reeves in custody. Whitaker unaccounted for. Case unresolved. Recommend surveillance in Riverton area. That night, as he left the office, rain swept across the highway. The same road Alyssa had once driven now felt colder, quieter, as if carrying the weight of unanswered questions. And somewhere beyond the storm, a pair of headlights flickered across the plains. The same kind of truck, the same direction, the same silence returning again. By early 1992, the investigation into Alyssa Redfeather's murder had stalled completely. Daniel Reeves remained behind bars awaiting trial. But with Earl Whitaker still missing, prosecutors hesitated to move forward. The state wanted certainty. 2 suspects, 1 verdict. Without Whitaker, they had only fragments. The bracelet, the soil, the fingerprints. Each piece told part of the story, but none revealed how Alyssa had died or who had struck the final blow. Reeves's lawyer used that uncertainty to his advantage, painting him as a scapegoat for a larger unknown killer. After months of delays, the case was quietly suspended, and Reeves was transferred to a federal facility for unrelated assault charges. Within a year, Alyssa's name faded from headlines. Her posters were taken down from storefronts, and the gas station where she worked hired new staff. On the Wind River Reservation, time moved forward, but the air still carried the heaviness of her absence. Her mother, Nora, kept the porch light on every night, long after most had stopped asking questions. Detective Mark Hensley was reassigned to another district, but the case never left him. He kept a box of files under his desk, photographs, soil reports, and Reeves's cryptic notes from his cell. Sometimes during long nights on other assignments, he would open it and reread the statements. Each one ended with the same hollow truth: Whitaker is gone. Years passed. Reeves died in custody in 1998 after a fight with another inmate. He left behind no confession, no final statement, only a list of names scratched into the underside of his bunk. Investigators found Alyssa's initials among them. It was the last trace of acknowledgement anyone would ever get from him. The official file on the Redfeather case was closed in 2001. Classified as unsolved homicide, secondary suspect at large, the evidence was boxed, labeled, and stored in the basement of the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. Dust gathered over the folders. Witnesses moved away, retired, or died. Every few years, someone new would look at the case, make notes, and put it back. Then came the silence, the kind that consumes even the memory of an investigation. Newspapers stopped mentioning Alyssa's name. Police reports shrank to a single-page summary. The Redfeather family continued to ask for updates, but the same line came every time: no new information at this time. By 2010, most of the original team had left law enforcement. The few who remained remembered the case like a faint echo, a tragedy with too many questions and too little proof. Still, the story never truly disappeared. Local kids grew up hearing whispers about the woman by the highway. Truckers passing through Wind River sometimes left flowers near the spot where her car had been found. Every anniversary, Nora Redfeather visited that roadside, standing in silence before the empty field. And beneath that silence, something waited. Evidence buried in time, technology that had not yet caught up. And one man who had never been found. Detective Hensley, now retired, still kept Alyssa's photograph on his desk at home. He believed that someday the truth would resurface. Maybe through a DNA match, maybe through a confession, or maybe by accident. He just did not expect it would happen more than 30 years later, through a piece of evidence no one had noticed before. A single hair sealed in an envelope, stored in the wrong box. It was that tiny fragment that would reopen everything the following year, and finally lead the case out of the dark. In 2021, a young forensic analyst named Tessa Morell joined the Fremont County Sheriff's Office as part of a statewide initiative to review unresolved cold cases. Most of the files were old, faded, and fragile. Tessa's task was to recatalog every piece of evidence that could still be tested using modern technology. On her third week, she opened a box labeled Redfeather Alyssa, 1990. Inside were dozens of sealed bags, soil samples, clothing fragments, and photographs bleached from time. But near the bottom, misfiled between unrelated case folders, she found a small paper envelope. It had no barcode, no catalog number, only the faded initials AR written in blue ink. Inside was a single strand of hair, carefully taped to a strip of paper. The chain of custody log listed it as questioned evidence found near vehicle, but no record showed it had ever been analyzed. Back in 1990, DNA testing was in its infancy. The evidence had simply been logged and forgotten. Tessa sent the hair to the Wyoming State Crime Lab for mitochondrial DNA sequencing, a method far more advanced than what had been available decades earlier. It took 4 weeks to process, but when the results came back, the match stunned everyone in the department. The DNA belonged to Earl Whitaker. After 31 years, the missing mechanic who had vanished without a trace was suddenly tied directly to Alyssa Redfeather's car. The same man Reeves had cryptically blamed before his death. The finding reignited the investigation overnight. Detectives reopened the Redfeather case, bringing in both tribal police and the FBI's cold case task force. The original evidence was unpacked, retested, and rephotographed. Every detail, from the soil on Alyssa's boots to the fibers from Reeves's camper, was examined again under digital microscopes. Tessa's discovery did more than confirm Whitaker's involvement. It revealed that multiple forensic items had been mislabeled or stored in the wrong section of the archive. A partial fingerprint, found on the car's driver's side door, once deemed unusable, was now digitally enhanced and matched the same individual. The evidence was clear. Whitaker had been at Alyssa's car the night she disappeared. Detective Mark Hensley, now in his late 60s, was contacted by the sheriff's office and invited to review the new findings. He arrived 2 days later, carrying his old case notes and that same worn photograph of Alyssa. Seeing her name again in an active file after 3 decades brought back every unanswered question he had lived with since 1990. He read through Tessa's report silently, his expression tightening with each page. When he reached the DNA confirmation, he closed the folder and said only one thing. Then he never left Wyoming. The next phase of the investigation focused on tracing Whitaker's movements after 1990. Property records showed that his workshop had been sold under an alias in 1991. The buyer, listed as Thomas Reed, matched Whitaker's age and description. That same alias appeared years later on an employment record in Carbon County. Tied to a logging company, using those leads, agents tracked Whitaker's likely route, from Riverton to Rawlins, then west toward the Idaho border. In 1996, a man with his description had been treated at a rural clinic under yet another name after a hand injury. That record provided a crucial detail, a blood sample that had been preserved as part of the clinic's patient archive. When compared to the new DNA profile, it matched Whitaker perfectly. The realization hit everyone hard. Whitaker had survived under false names for over 3 decades, blending in with seasonal workers and transient labor crews. He had likely watched the investigation fade, certain he had escaped, but technology had caught up to him. The sheriff's office announced the breakthrough quietly, informing Alyssa's surviving family before releasing any details to the public. Nora Redfeather, now frail and in her 70s, listened to the news without speaking for several minutes. When she finally did, her words were simple. "I always knew his shadow was still here." Detectives began preparing an arrest warrant and working with federal marshals to locate Whitaker. The hunt was about to begin again, and this time, the silence of 30 years was about to be broken, not by rumor, not by guesswork, but by a single strand of truth that had waited, untouched. In a forgotten envelope, the search for Earl Whitaker reignited with an intensity Wyoming had not seen in decades. After the DNA confirmation, federal marshals joined state and tribal police in what quickly became a coordinated multi-county operation. Every record, every old alias, every small-town clinic log was rechecked. Whitaker had been running for 30 years, but now the walls were closing in. Investigators believed he was still alive, likely moving between seasonal jobs under new names, staying off digital systems and living in cash-based work. What made the search difficult was Whitaker's familiarity with rural terrain. He knew the state's backroads, oil fields, and forgotten trails better than most locals. For weeks, search teams followed scattered leads. A mechanic in Rawlins remembered an older man calling himself Erlen, who repaired farm machinery and paid in old bills. A motel clerk near Dubois recalled a man with a scar on his right hand, who always asked for rooms far from the road. Each sighting felt close, but each ended the same way, and too late. Then, one night in late October, an anonymous call came through the sheriff's tip line. The voice was male, nervous, and brief. "He is here," the caller said, "living in a trailer outside Crowheart. Calls himself Mr. Wills." By dawn, law enforcement vehicles moved quietly down the gravel road that led into the foothills. Aerial drones circled above as marshals spread across the perimeter. The small trailer sat alone near a cluster of pine trees, its windows dark. A faint column of smoke rose from a metal chimney. Detective Mark Hensley, who had insisted on being part of the operation despite his retirement, stood beside the lead marshal. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door. "If he runs," he said, "he will take the back path down to the creek. That is what he used before." At 6:14 a.m. they made entry. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. The trailer was filled with tools, maps, and boxes of old radio parts. On the table sat a single coffee cup, half full, had still warm, and near it a folded newspaper with a headline that read, "DNA links cold case killer to Wind River murder." Whitaker had been reading about himself. The back door was open. Officers sprinted toward the trees, flashlights cutting through the early light. For nearly half an hour they searched the ravine until one of the deputies called out, "Footprints in the mud leading toward the creek." The chase ended near the riverbank. Whitaker was found crouched behind an old fallen log, clutching a small hunting knife. He looked older than anyone expected, white hair, lined face, eyes sunken but steady. When ordered to drop the weapon, he did so slowly, his voice rasping from disuse. "I knew you would come," he said quietly. He was arrested without resistance. Back at the county office, Whitaker was processed under his real name for the first time in 3 decades. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, and personal items linking him to the scene. During questioning, he refused to answer most of the investigators' questions. Only once did he speak, when asked why he had killed Alyssa Redfeather. His reply was simple, almost detached. She said no. That was enough. The room fell silent. Even seasoned officers turned away. The brutality of the truth stripped away years of uncertainty. There was no mystery left, no doubt, only the weight of what had been lost. When the news broke, it spread across the state in hours. For the first time, Alyssa's family could attach a name to the horror that had haunted them for 31 years. Her mother, Nora, received the call from Hensley personally. She did not cry or speak. She just whispered, "Now she can rest." Whitaker was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. His trial was scheduled for the following spring. As Whitaker sat in his cell awaiting court, Detective Hensley visited the site where Alyssa's car had been found, the same stretch of highway where it all began. The field was quiet, the wind low. He stood there for a long time watching the horizon. 31 years of silence had ended with a single match, a strand of hair, a forgotten envelope, and the one man who had believed time could bury the truth. But in Wyoming, time had only been waiting. The trial of Earl Whitaker began in the spring of 2022, inside the Fremont County Courthouse, the same building where Alyssa's case had first been filed 32 years earlier. Reporters filled every seat. Members of the Wind River community lined the hallways, silent, holding photographs of missing women. For many, this trial was not only about Alyssa Redfeather, it was about justice that had waited too long to arrive. Whitaker entered the courtroom in a gray jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, head lowered. The years of hiding had aged him beyond recognition. His lawyer announced that Whitaker would plead not guilty, arguing that Daniel Reeves, now long deceased, had been the true killer, and Whitaker's only crime was silence. But the evidence told a different story. Over the first 3 days, prosecutors presented a precise, methodical case. They laid out the timeline, the DNA results, and the physical evidence connecting Whitaker directly to Alyssa's car and her remains. The recovered bracelet, the soil traces, and the single strand of hair all tied together in a web too strong to deny. Jurors listened to forensic expert Tessa Morell, the young analyst whose rediscovery of the evidence had reopened the case. She explained how modern mitochondrial DNA sequencing had confirmed Whitaker's presence beyond any margin of error. Her testimony was calm, factual, and devastating to the defense. Then came Detective Mark Hensley, now white-haired, his voice steady but edged with memory. He described the original investigation, the night Alyssa vanished, the empty car, the footprints that ended at the roadside. When asked what he remembered most, he said, "The coffee in her cup was still warm. It felt like the world had stopped, just waiting for us to find her." The courtroom was silent. The defense tried to shift focus toward Reeves, suggesting that Whitaker had been coerced or framed. But the forensic links were undeniable. Reeves's camper had contained soil from the riverbank. But Whitaker's DNA was found at the car itself, a location Reeves never reached according to witness accounts. On the 6th day, prosecutors presented Whitaker's personal journal recovered from his trailer. Inside were sketches of backroads and isolated spots across Wyoming. One page was marked with a single phrase, "The girl who would not listen." That phrase matched a line Whitaker had muttered during his first interrogation. It was enough to remove any doubt. By the second week, the defense had little ground left. Whitaker himself remained mostly silent, watching the proceedings without emotion. But something shifted on the 9th day, when Nora Redfeather, frail but resolute, took the stand. She spoke softly, her words slow but unwavering. "For years I kept her room the same," she said. I used to believe someone would knock one night and tell me she was coming home. But time never brought her back. Only truth could. Whitaker looked at her for the first time since the trial began. For a brief moment, the hardness in his face faltered. The next morning, before testimony resumed, his attorney approached the judge. Whitaker had decided to speak. He confessed to taking Alyssa the night of her disappearance. He said he had offered her a ride when her car stalled, a lie meant to earn her trust. He admitted to driving her toward the quarry road and killing her after she resisted. He buried her near the river and fled the state days later with Reeves's help. His words were quiet, almost mechanical, as though rehearsed. He showed no visible remorse. But the courtroom felt the weight of what had finally been said aloud, the truth buried for 3 decades. After his statement, there was no need for deliberation. The jury found him guilty on all counts within hours. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. As officers led Whitaker away, Nora sat still, eyes closed. Outside the courthouse, wind swept across the street, carrying the sound of distant thunder. Detective Hensley stood near the steps, hands in his coat pockets. He did not feel triumph, only a quiet sense of ending. Justice had come, but too late for the life it was meant to protect. And as the doors closed behind Whitaker, the echoes of that night in 1990 lingered, proof that time can hide the truth, but it can never erase it. The conviction of Earl Whitaker brought a strange stillness to the Wind River Reservation. For weeks after the trial, the community seemed caught between relief and sorrow. News cameras left, reporters packed their equipment, and the courthouse steps, once crowded with people seeking answers, grew quiet again. Yet beneath that silence, something had shifted. For the first time in 32 years, Alyssa Redfeather's name was no longer part of an open investigation. Her family could finally speak of her without the shadow of uncertainty. But closure did not feel the way they imagined. Justice had come. Yes, but it had arrived 3 decades too late. Alyssa's remains were laid to rest on a cold morning that March. The tribal drumbeat echoed across the valley as elders offered prayers for her spirit's journey. Members of nearby communities came to pay their respects. Many had lost daughters, sisters, or friends in similar disappearances that never saw the inside of a courtroom. The ceremony was more than a farewell. It was a reminder of how many still waited for their own answers. Detective Mark Hensley attended quietly, standing in the back near the line of police vehicles. He had retired years earlier, but the case had never left him. As he watched Nora and her family place flowers on Alyssa's grave, he realized this was not victory. It was the end of a wound that had taken half a lifetime to close. Later that week, Nora sat in her living room surrounded by photographs, not just of Alyssa, but of the young women who had vanished from Wind River before and after her. Some names were known. Others were just faces on missing posters that had long since faded. She spoke to a local journalist that evening, her voice steady but tired. "I want my daughter's story to remind people," she said. "Not every missing person gets found. Not every mother gets to bury her child. But we have to keep asking why." Her words would later be quoted in national papers. Lawmakers cited Alyssa's case when discussing reforms for missing and murdered Indigenous women. Grants were issued to improve coordination between tribal and state law enforcement. DNA evidence processing for cold cases was prioritized. In a quiet way, Alyssa's name began changing how justice worked for others. Meanwhile, the Wind River Police Department re-examined several unsolved disappearances from the late 1980s and early 1990s. Some bore unsettling similarities: remote roads, abandoned cars, no sign of struggle. Though no direct connection to Whitaker was proven, his confession prompted investigators to search other sites he had marked in his journals. At 2 of those locations, fragments of women's clothing were found, along with bone fragments too degraded for identification. Forensic teams began the slow process of analysis, reopening old case files, contacting families who had long since lost hope. Alyssa's case, once seen as a tragic mystery, became a key that unlocked a larger truth: that silence had allowed too many others to disappear unnoticed. Detective Hensley worked as a consultant for those follow-up cases. He no longer wore a badge, but he reviewed reports from his small office at home, surrounded by boxes labeled cold files. In one interview he said, you learn that justice is not a moment. It is a chain, every link connected to another. Break one and the rest fall apart. As months passed, life on the reservation slowly returned to its rhythm. The gas station where Alyssa had worked was rebuilt under new management. Her photograph still hung near the counter, framed, polished, never forgotten. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the community gathered there to light candles. They called it the Night of Return. A vigil not just for Alyssa, but for every name still unanswered. In prison, Earl Whitaker lived in near isolation. His health declined quickly, and he rarely spoke to anyone. When he died 2 years later, few took notice. The official statement listed natural causes. There was no funeral, no visitors. The man who had stolen so many futures left the world as quietly as he had lived in it. But the story he left behind did not fade. Documentaries, podcasts, and educational programs began retelling Alyssa's case, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a warning about the cost of neglect. In the final report filed on the Wind River murders, one line stood out: "Truth may sleep, but it never dies." And for those who had waited half their lives for answers, that truth was finally enough. Yet even now, some nights when the wind moves across the valley, locals say they hear faint footsteps by the roadside where her car once stood, as if the land itself remembers what was taken and refuses to forget.